Longbows were powerful weapons, but keeping archers supplied with ammunition was a major undertaking.
This is a modern arrow. Small and lightweight. Pretty much what everyone shoots these days. Compared to this medieval war arrow. Look at the size of this thing. It's a beast.
A medieval army might need more than 1 million war arrows on campaign, and each one had to be made by hand. It was a labor-intensive business, and the person who did it was called a fletcher. First, a log is split into square staves. Then the fletcher uses a plane to start roughing out the shape.
Ugh, how do I get it round?
Not only have you got to make it round, you've got to make it bobtailed. Look at that.
Bobtailed?
You see that's coming down thinner down that end? There's a natural taper coming down there to that end.
A plane with a curved blade is used to create the taper. This makes the arrow aerodynamic.
This is an incredibly painstaking process for one arrow.
Most of them are just for one shot as well.
Next, a slot is cut to receive a piece of horn. The horn reinforces the nock. That's the notch that fits the arrow to the bowstring. Without the horn insert, the power of a heavy warbow could split and shatter an arrow. Once the horn is in place, the nock is sawn and shaped. Then the fletcher has to attach the feathers to the shaft.
Now what you've got to do is you've got to get rid of the stiffness of the quill. You're going to work it down so it's nice and thin.
So this is dogfish skin?
Yeah, medieval sandpaper.
The feathers are glued in place and then secured with thread. The final process is to arm the arrow with its arrowhead. The person who makes these is called an arrowsmith. From a blank piece of iron, he starts with the part that fits over the arrow shaft. First, he makes the bar flat, then uses a special former to create a socket. The final stage is to hammer out the shape of the head. Arrow stocks had to be prepared far in advance of a campaign. It was impossible to make them in sufficient numbers overnight. A medieval war arrow like this could only be shot from a big, exceptionally powerful bow. And it packed a mighty punch. With rebels and raiders eliminated at Cocherel, King Charles V faced one last threat to France, the relentless English invaders. Word arrived that the English army was weak and scattered, divided by infighting. The king quickly directed his army to chase down the old enemy of France at Pontvallain. A medieval army on the march was a city on the move. No expense was spared to keep knights and nobles in the lap of luxury.
Knights lived in luxurious tents called pavilions, which had all of their furnishing, proper chairs and tableware, real beds with fine linens, even wall hangings.
All this furniture had to be transported, and that's on top of what was needed for combat. Weapons and armor needed an army of artisans to maintain them.
The armourer's job on campaign was one of maintenance, constantly repairing, knocking out dents, simply changing straps, or replacing rivets that had broken. If you think of the knight as a race car driver, the armourer is his chief mechanic. Without him, he would not be able to function.
Also following an army was a band of opportunistic civilians, the camp followers, all vying to sell their services and goods to the soldiers. When on the march, most of the thousands of soldiers were mounted. Each knight would have at least 6 horses, all needing grooms, farriers, and fodder.
The royal household brought with them their clerks, their priests, essential for men who feared they might die in battle. And of course, their cooks.
The common soldier subsisted mainly on bread and a thick soup called pottage. It was an altogether different story for the knights.
A knight on campaign would expect the best food. So we have game, we have fine meats, we have fruit when it's in season, always cooked, because food is tied in with health as well. That's very important. And I'm just finishing off a dish here of spiced meatballs with a red wine and pine nut sauce.
French and English armies could be on campaign for months on end, maneuvering and skirmishing until they took to the field for a decisive battle. The French won an overwhelming victory at the Battle of Pontvallain. It was the first time the English had been utterly defeated during the war. But the triumph was short-lived. As England spent the next 60 years amassing French territory through alliances and victories at great battles such as Agincourt. It seemed that nothing could stop England. Who then could have foreseen that a teenaged girl was about to change the course of history? In 1429, France was in dire straits. Nowhere was it more evident than the besieged city of Orleans. The city was completely surrounded by English-held forts. But just a few days' ride away, here in Chinon, there was potential help. The French royal prince, the Dauphin Charles, was holed up in his fortress and under pressure to ride out to save Orleans. As Charles hesitated, a young peasant girl arrived at his court. Her name was Jeanne d'Arc. She claimed to have received saintly visions, giving her a divine task to help Charles become king and drive the English out of France forever. Charles was skeptical, but was soon convinced of her divinity. And he charged this 17-year-old with the near impossible mission to liberate Orleans. To Jeanne, this was the first step in realizing her God-given destiny. In April 1429, she rode out from Chinon at the head of her army to confront the hated enemy of France.